Madam Chair,
Yes.
Councilman Spadola has joined. So we do have a quorum and the time is now 5 o'clock. So
Okay.
you may begin when you're ready.
All right, we'll start. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a meeting of the Wilmington City Council Public Safety Committee. My name is Loretta Walsh. I'm a city council member at large and I'm a chair. I'm going to take the role for this committee. Councilwoman Oliver is at a League of Cities conference in Washington, D.C. Linda Gray.
Present.
Chris Johnson.
Councilman Gray, First District, present.
Chris Johnson. Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Spadola.
Present.
Councilmember Mills.
Present.
I apologize, Councilmember Gray. I didn't mean to belittle you in any way, shape, or form. So I apologize.
Thank you. I understand. Getting started, we always forget things.
Yeah,
Getting the meeting started.
exactly. Thank you. Okay, we'll get right to the meeting. We have a couple things on our agenda today. The first one that we're going to look at is a resolution urging the General Assembly to support Senate Bill number 149 in its original introduction form. The council member on this is Councilmember Johnson. Would you like to speak? Would you like to speak to this issue, council member?
Good evening, Chairwoman. Yes, I would like to speak on the resolution that I placed before the committee tonight. Long story short, this is actually, this resolution had a previous iteration last year in which we supported SB 149, which was currently pending in this General Assembly session. And what this is a follow-up to that resolution, strongly urging our colleagues in the General Assembly to continue with SB 149 in its current form. As this is, there's been much debate in Dover about just what changes need to be made to LEOBOR, which is a law enforcement officer and Bill of Rights, and what changes need to be made to civilian oversight boards. And the SB 149, as is currently crafted, which was reported out of Senate committee in June of 2021, this is the one that makes sure that city residents and residents throughout the state have a seat at the table. Wilmington, just for a little history lesson, we passed the Civilian Oversight Board back in November 19, 2020. And we passed this ordinance empowering a local board made up of citizens and those who are experienced in law enforcement to give residents a seat at the table for investigating complaints, looking at police policies and procedures, and generally making sure the department has input from the citizens. And that was followed up again by movement at the state level to make sure we can have this fully empowered board. And the current talks right now in the General Assembly are that the boards will be somewhat weakened. Local boards will be weakened, and it'll be more statewide boards. And for those reasons, as we've heard from many community members throughout the city, is that they want local authority. As you know, we believe Wilmingtonians and those who are involved with Wilmington should have a say in Wilmington police matters and not a state or countywide board. So that's what the resolution is, just again encouraging the General Assembly to go forward with 149, SB 149 as is, and so that cities like Wilmington, so that can pass, and cities like Wilmington can stand up on civilian oversight boards, and we can finally move forward with police reform in the first state.
And if I may, Councilmember, 149 is still in committee in Dover?
Yes, it is. It is now in House. It passed the Senate last session. It's now with the House, and that's the last leg.
Okay, do any council members first on the committee have any questions? I don't see anybody's hand, which doesn't mean you don't have it raised, so shout out if I don't call on you.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to be recognized. This is Council President.
Oh, Council President Congo is in attendance.
Yeah, and this is Councilwoman Darby. I would like to be recognized too. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Darby is also in attendance. Anyone who would like to ask a question at this point? Seeing or hearing no one from council, would any member of the audience like to ask a question? Seeing none, this is a resolution, so we, I'm sorry.
It looks like it is someone, Chairwoman.
His hand is raised.
I believe Christina Kay.
Yes, Ms. Kay. Ms. Kelly.
Hi, this is Christina Kelly. Thank you very much for an opportunity to speak. First, I wanted to thank the council for putting this resolution up. I think that it's really important that our state lawmakers know that they have the support of local governments. I did want to ask how the resolution goes to address the makeup, or if it goes to address the makeup of boards, or if we're just sticking with a basic, just we support SB 149 unamended.
Ms. Kelly, I believe, as you know, questions will be answered after this meeting. This is not a panel for council members to be asked questions.
Okay, you asked if anybody had questions. I had a question, so thank you.
Okay, I mean, you can ask it and it'll get answered too.
Yep, that was my only question, was just
Okay.
if it went to speak to the makeup, or if it was just a general resolution providing support for SB 149 in its unamended phase.
Thank you. Thank you for participating. Anyone else who has a question?
I have one, Madam Chair.
Yes.
So when we invite, this is just, I guess, a matter of procedure. When we invite the community to engage in these committee meetings and they have questions, what's the process when that they'll be answered if it's not at the committee meeting?
The council members want to ask the question, as I believe you well know, Council President, at the committee meetings, and a staff member will get back to any member of the public who has a question.
Okay.
This is for the public to give their opinions of what is being addressed by this or any other committee also.
So when council members have questions, they're to be answered during the committee meeting or afterwards?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I guess I'm just wondering the difference. Like,
Well, there's a big difference. One group is elected and they're serving on these committees as part of their being elected, and the other group are participants in their government. Not any lesser than a council member can be, but everyone has the right to run for public office and be free to ask questions whenever they want. And if somebody else wants to run their committee some way differently, I guess you can approve that.
Okay, so I guess I would like to ask that same question that was just asked by one of our constituents.
Ask the question, Council President.
Same question. Does it speak to the makeup or just the support of the committee? Same question. I'm not sure why.
Mr. Johnson, do you want me to answer it or do you want to answer it?
I can
Because I
certainly
think-
answer, Chairwoman. This is a question we've had before. So as the ordinance presents, so this ordinance just goes about SB 149, which is the passage of that at the state level. Now, in terms of, I think the question about what the makeup is at the city level, ordinance 20034 has not been amended, and it is still in its original form. So the makeup of the board as of November 2020 is still the way it is predicted to go down. So now at the state level, if they make any requirements, we're certainly going to have to adhere to it. But that's why it's important to track what's happening at the state level, because that will possibly make us have to change stuff at the local level.
And I think, council member, that the big difference is one stayed with council, and that was the formation of the committee, which is a council piece. This is being sent to the General Assembly, is asking for them to pass the original legislation that was introduced down there by them, which will then be part of what you requested for your city change.
Correct, Chairwoman. And just to make it even further clear, you know, we want as much freedom as we can from the city level. But if they, if the state again requires a certain makeup of the board, such as having retired law enforcement on it or anything, a certain amount of members of a certain sex, I have no idea. But if there are requirements, then the city will, of course, have to, with law department, have to look at what the requirements are from the state level to make sure that our board is compliant.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on to the next subject. We don't have to vote it out since it's a resolution, so. The next resolution is being introduced by Councilwoman Cabrera, who called me last night and asked if we could do this. She is also down at the National League of Cities, and this has to do with gun violence. And this is not going to the state legislature, but rather to our singular representative to support the Victims Act bill that the city of Wilmington supports, compensating victims of homicides and shootings and their families. So this is to be sent down to our congressional legislation representative. And it's being delivered on behalf of Councilmember Cabrera. Do I have any questions? Seeing no questions from, yes, I'm sorry. Who is this? Is there a council member who had a question they wanted to answer?
Yes, I think Councilwoman Gray has her hand up.
Okay. Councilmember Gray?
Yes,
Yes, you have your hand up.
I had my hand up for another reason. I'm sorry. But I didn't take
Okay.
it down. Thank you.
Not a problem. Any member of the audience? Okay, seeing none, this will be forwarded to the federal or to our federal representative, and who always represents us very well down in Washington. Okay, now we're going to go on to the agenda. I believe we have a presentation by the police department.
Good evening, Council Chair, Police Chief Robert Tracy, Wilmington Police Department.
Thank you, Chief Tracy. Somewhere in my papers, I have, oh, here it is. I inadvertently lost the agenda for a minute there. So, year-to-date crime statistics, you're presenting them, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. And I also earlier today sent up-to-date statistics to the staff over at council. I don't know if that can be brought up or I can go over them verbally, but there is a copy for the council members for them to have that was sent over earlier today. Just to follow up, at the beginning of this year, we're over 10 weeks in. So as of Sunday night, crime statistics ending for all part one crimes to misdemeanor thefts. So what I really want to talk about is the things that we're doing, the crime strategies we put out towards the end of the year. We talked about back in January, and then also that's up on our website. And then all our statistics, up-to-date information is on CrimeView, which can be brought up on our website, and you can go in and look at your areas for information that's up to date. And then also the ComStat reports that are updated weekly, and it goes by 3 sectors in the city, and each sector has 3 districts that covers a certain area of the city. So you could break down year-to-date analysis by 7-day, 28-day, and year-to-date. This evening, we're just going over the year-to-date numbers. If we just start with the murders so far this year, we go back on that sheet, it goes back 8 years to 2015. Right now, we have 3 homicides this year versus 4 in 2021, 4 in 2020, 5 in 2019, 6 in 2018, 10 in 2017. So we're down 70% from where we were 5 years ago, 7 in 2016 and 8 in 2015. So within this, it's the lowest amount. It's progress. It's certainly good to get out of the gate with one too many. But the way all the other cities in the United States coming out of this pandemic, we're actually coming out a little better off than these other cities. And I always talk about when 95% of your murders in a city are by gunshot, we got to make sure that we're taking care of the people with the highest propensity of violence that are carrying firearms, which you've done for the last few years, where we set records in illegal possession of firearm arrests and the amount of guns we recovered. And when you reduce shooting incidents, naturally the homicides come down, and we're in the areas looking at the people that have the highest propensity for violence. So this year so far, we have 12 shooting incidents versus 19 in 2021, 20 in 2020, 17 in 2019, 15 in 2018, 35 in 2017, which is almost a 66% decrease, 22 in 2016, and 20 in 2015. So the shooting incidents are down compared to the last 8 years, and down from where we were 5 years ago, close to almost 70%. And the same goes with the shooting victims, which is just is incidents and victims, but I'll go over those numbers because they're on your sheet. We have 15 shooting victims this year. 2021 had 24 at this time. 2020 had 23. 2019 had 22. 2018 had 16. 2017 had 39 people shot at this time. 2016 had 24, as well as 2015. Our overall crime, which is not on the sheet, but it's on the sheet, the ComStat sheet, we're down 1% this year, but we're down an average of over 20% for the last 8 years in overall crime. And at the same time, we're actually up in gun arrests again, compared to, we're trending the same way with gun arrests. So we're still making those gun arrests. But what I see that's changed in the last few months is the amount of bail on people with legal firearms or violent crimes are higher. We're seeing individuals now, more consequence from individuals that are doing violent crimes that are getting substantial time and they're staying in. And then overall, the percentage of people getting out right away is going down. And I think it's Senate Bill number 7 that was put through the state legislature and signed by the governor mid-year last year. That's having a good impact. I see, it's not even anecdotal, I'm starting to see the percentages start to come down, where if you're arrested for a violent crime and then and you're released on pretrial supervision or bail, if you get arrested for another crime, violent crime, say possessing a firearm or a robbery, the eligibility for bail is very, very high. And therefore, if you get back out and you commit another crime and you're arrested, you're going to stay in. And I think that's helped out a lot. And then there was a presentation before this council with the group violence intervention team with Director John Cook and his team that everybody got to see the type of work where we're not just looking at the people with highest propensity for violence to arrest them. We're looking to get them out of the life of crime. And that's through social services and then rehabilitation and jobs and education and relocation if need so. And they're doing a tremendous job that now they're into their third, fourth calling, where naturally I've seen in other places, once you get to that point, when all these things come together and the courts now are operational and the prosecutors are back and defense attorneys and the judges, I think with the work that the Wilmington Police Department is doing, there's some progress here. And if we can sustain this and keep doing and continue to try to improve on this, we'll do very well this year. And hopefully we can build off of it and get away from those pandemic years. And like I said, if you're looking at cities, even in the surrounding area from New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and even my past city, Chicago, they're not doing so well. And we pretty much have shown improvement. Hopefully we can sustain it.
Thank you, Chief. Do any council members have any questions?
Madam Chair, I have my hand up.
Thank you, council member, for letting me know. Council member Gray?
Thank you. Congratulations, Chief, to you and the department for these very uplifting numbers. Hopefully the trend will continue this way. I guess all I can say is now we just have to do something about the actual internal process, but still congratulations.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you, council member. Any other council member?
I have my hand up, Madam Chair.
Council member Spadola?
Thank you. Good evening, Chief Tracy. I just wanted to confirm. So you see a direct correlation between increased bail and less violence on the streets. Is that correct?
Yes, that's one of the factors, Councilman. When you start to see somewhat of a penalty or violent offenders not getting back on the streets, which we were seeing the last few years, there's more individuals out there that are coming in contact with each other that I believe, in my experience, was contributing to more violence on the street.
Thank you, Chief. Sounds like we're getting back to a little more common sense with our criminal justice system.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if council members get those statistics or not, or get the information, but it was becoming absurd when you saw somebody who had gotten out on a pretty heavy gun charge, like 2 nights before they're then committing another crime with a gun. And if you're involved in criminal justice anywhere along the system, I would think you had to be extremely frustrated that your neighborhood was going through this because, people are going back to the same neighborhoods and doing the same things. So, and nobody was listening. But obviously, after the bill passed, someone was listening. Council members, anyone else who would like to make a comment?
Yes, I have my hand up again.
Councilmember Gray?
Yes, I'm just going to uphold the criminal justice system. This years ago, everyone was aware of this, but there are federal guidelines about bail. You can't refuse someone bail unless it's a very serious offense like murder or treason or something like that. So they've just figured out how to say that they will give you a very, very high bail because judges have guidelines. And it came to the attention that people you wouldn't think would be able to make bail had people behind them like gangs or people that had money that would put up what you thought was sufficient bail to keep them in jail. So it's a fruition of all these things coming together and the legislation finally getting forward how to address this problem. It's like it was known before. I'm just letting people know that this isn't a new thing, to know if you can keep someone in jail, then they won't be out in the street committing more crimes. Thank you.
Anyone else from council? Any member of the public who would like to say something? Last call, seeing none. Thank you, Chief, for your time. I appreciate your taking it out to come and speak to us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, council members and public.
Our next is going to be a presentation from Nicole, and I've been asked by people if we would all start using the full names of these organizations, because the average person has no idea who we're talking about. And this group is the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. Today's presentation is being done by Cameron McElhaney and Brian Corr. Did I say your name correctly, Mr. McElhaney?
You did.
Or Ms., I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're not on Zoom with me right now. Thank you for coming, and thank you for doing the presentation. And you can start whenever you would like.
Thank you very much. So yes, my name is Cameron McElhaney. I also have Brian Corr here with me. And we are from NACOL, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. We have been asked to do a brief presentation on who we are as an organization and what we are able to offer Wilmington as it works to implement its civilian oversight mechanism. So with that, I will, Brian, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
All right. Of course. Thank you, Cami. We generally call Cameron Cami within NACOL. So I'm Brian Corr. I live and work in the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I'm the director of our civilian oversight agency. We have a police department of about 300 sworn officers and a city with 150,000 people during the day, a wide range of people. I also have been involved in NACOL for a good 12, 13 years. I was president of the association for 3 years, from 2016 to 2019, elected by the membership. And so have worked with Cami and people all over the country to establish civilian oversight, work to implement new systems, and help improve and modify systems they already have. So, thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And just a little bit about myself. I am actually from Indianapolis, Indiana. I've been with the organization in one form or another since 1998. I began in the field of oversight as a civilian review board member myself here in Indianapolis, where I quickly realized the lack of training that existed for civilian review board members, the incredible learning curve for all in a city involved, not only just the ins and outs, the everydays of civilian oversight, but also the expectations that go along with it. So from that moment, I decided that providing more training and assistance to those cities that are out there doing this work would be beneficial to the work as a whole. So again, thank you for having us today. And if we could just skip to slide 4, if you don't mind. Thank you. And then I'll turn it back over to you, Brian.
All right. Thank you, Cami. So NACOL, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, is a national association. We have been in existence since 1995, as it says in the slide. And we are an organization that has a variety of people involved. We include people who are practitioners of civilian oversight, staff and board members. We have people who are working on federal consent decrees. We have activists, and I always say we have everything from police chiefs to Black Lives Matter activists. They're part of our organization. And we really work to, as it says, again, create a community of support for independent civilian oversight so that we can ensure that communities receive the type of policing, the type of law enforcement that they need and deserve. We really believe that this is something that could benefit every community. So we're very excited to be here with you in Wilmington today. And it's just one of those things that I always appreciate any community that has taken the step to do this, because this is why NACOL exists. It started with a small group in the 1990s, and we now have almost 1,000 individuals involved as members, as well as well over 100 different cities and communities across the country that are part of the organization. I guess, Cami, I'll send it back to you.
Yeah.
For
Next slide, please. So in addition to working with cities like Wilmington, we also educate jurisdictions considering or developing civilian oversight of law enforcement. Sometimes we work with commissions and task forces developed by cities who are looking to put together recommendations for civilian oversight. We also set high professional and ethical standards for organizations, practitioners charged with the civilian oversight. We'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. We do things such as providing educational services, such as an annual training conference, pre-pandemic, and hopefully soon, once again in the near future, regional meetings, and then also webinar series, so we can get as much training about civilian oversight of law enforcement and also those peripheral topics that it touches out to the community as a whole. We also support strategies and efforts, ensuring that oversight organizations are independent and have the adequate enough authority and sufficient funding to actually be effective and sustainable. And then we also work for those who are doing the work of civilian oversight, sometimes under circumstances less than favorable to doing the work effectively. Next slide, please.
All right, so as you can see, again, the slides, we have been very busy over the last few years. And the last 2 years in particular, we have worked with communities all across the United States, and in fact, even some communities in Mexico and in Canada. But we are working through these three main pillars. We do informal assistance, and this would be an example of that in a certain sense, just providing information to government officials, community activists, people from law enforcement directly about the kind of work they can do, how to implement the version of civilian oversight that works best in their environment, that meets the needs of their community. And there's a very large range of types of oversight agencies. We also do formal training, again, for elected officials, law enforcement agencies, and others. We do that through these types of internet interfaces. We have started doing in-person training again, and we do training through our annual conference, which, again, as you've heard, we generally have between 300 and 500 people who attend in person for a few days. But that's the best way for us to really bring people together to share experience and ideas and do that training. And then the third leg is really technical assistance. So as communities are really moving forward with establishing oversight, and again, it's great to hear about the work that the City Council is doing to create oversight here, where you are, here in Wilmington, Delaware. That's the kind of thing that we love to do. Cammie and I and other board members from NACO have worked with communities from Bennington, Vermont, where I've been working, a town of 15,000 people in southern Vermont, to cities like Dallas, Fort Worth in Texas, Houston, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona, some of the largest cities in the country, and everything in between. And then there are communities that have had oversight for years, and in the current environment, really looking at ways to upgrade that, to make it more effective, to really meet the needs of communities today. Next slide, please.
So when there is a city that is looking to establish or enhance an existing oversight and mechanism, some of the things that we do when we're working with them is to, well, first of all, guide them through that process. What does it look like to establish civilian oversight? What are the steps? Then we also provide training on the basics of civilian oversight, what the benefits of it are, the different types of models, the 13 principles for effective civilian oversight, and then also how you turn those principles into actual effective practices and authorities for civilian oversight of law enforcement. And we also do things such as facilitate discussions within a community, lead focus groups, and then also review documents and recommendations to give feedback on how it looks as is, some suggestions of how it's worked in other communities, so that you can have the broadest amount of information possible when you're moving forward with each decision point. Next slide.
So to dig into the technical assistance a bit, again, it's something that's a really important part of what NACOL does. And when I first got involved in NACOL in about 2010, there was very little of that. It was pretty informal, but now we have a very formal process that we use. We do training on effective practices. And I'll just say quickly that we refer to effective practices, and that was part of a report that we did funded by the Federal Department of Justice, their Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services. We talk about effective practices because there's such a variety in conditions, state laws, the history and background of a community, that there really aren't best practices that are universally applicable. And so that's part of what we really work hard with communities. And then things like developing policies and procedures, primarily for the oversight agency or entity, but also working with law enforcement agencies on their policies and procedures and training. Facilitating long-term strategy development is important for communities, especially as they begin civilian oversight, because there's often a huge range of expectations and ideas among the different stakeholders. And we always say you have to include all the stakeholders. So that really takes well thought out strategy. And then, like everything else, other duties is assigned. When there's other assistance that's needed to make it successful, we step up to the plate and we work to do that additional technical assistance. So next slide, please.
So one of the things that we do find ourselves working with communities on is just how to kind of move through what can be a very difficult process. Managing expectations of all stakeholders can be a very difficult part of this process. A lot of times people, once the process is done, there's an ordinance in place, people think, well, everything's going to change now. And oversight is very much a marathon and not a sprint. It's a process to get here, and it's a process to move forward and make change. It's a process to build trust up in areas where it might not exist in certain places. And it's also really important, NACL very much believes that putting in place a process like this, it's really important that all stakeholders feel like it's being done with them rather than to them. And helping to work people involved in implementing the process to make sure that people feel like they are part of that process and have a good understanding of what's happening and what's happening next. NACL also becomes a very neutral partner in this process. We base our knowledge on effective practices that have been established over time. We have a national network of practitioners that we call on. We feel like cities who are implementing oversight should not have to reinvent the wheel all of the time, that there are those doing the work in other cities who have most likely had similar situations if problems do arise, and working with them and getting advice and allowing people to build a network of other civilian oversight practitioners across the country who can help them long after we're gone, supporting or just providing advice. And just as you might need an academic perspective, a labor perspective, a police executive perspective in certain situations when you're implementing oversight, having an oversight perspective is often very, very helpful. Next slide, please.
And I know we've been going back and forth, but actually, Cammie, I think, why don't you take the next slide and I'll take the following two. I think
absolutely.
You speak to this very well, I think.
So early on in NACL's history, we realized that one of the core tenets of civilian oversight is that to do the work well is to hold ourselves to a very high standard. And because of that, NACL developed a code of ethics, which we ask all of our member cities to also adopt in their oversight work. And from that code of ethics, these are just the basic elements of it: personal integrity, professional excellence, independent and thorough oversight, that agencies should do self-examination and have a commitment to policy review of themselves, that they are just not overseeing the law enforcement agency, but they have to make sure that they're holding themselves to the highest standards as well. And that means occasionally looking inward to make sure that there are things in place that maybe they need to be looked at, adjusted, done a little differently, and that they should never overlook the possibility that they could be doing things better. Also, transparency and confidentiality are incredibly important, as well as outreach and relationships with stakeholders, not just in the beginning when an oversight entity is forming, but for the rest of its existence. It really has to make sure that it has that communication line with both, not just the community, but the broader community, all stakeholders. And that respectful and unbiased treatment of all individuals involved in the process, no matter what side they're on in the process, is paramount and incredibly essential to effective civilian oversight. And now I'll turn it back over to you, Brian.
All right, so great.
Next
If we can
slide.
go to so thinking about how that actually affects the work we do and how that impacts us as civilian oversight practitioners, board members, and people involved in that work, there are these three pillars, I would say, for this. One is the role that we have as public servants that oversee law enforcement agencies. It's vital that we do this work in a professional and impartial manner. There's a lot of talk these days about procedural justice and legitimacy in law enforcement. It was a big part of the President's Task Force in 21st Century Policing. That also applies to civilian oversight. We have to earn trust. We have to become legitimate through our commitment to the public good, to staying with those standards of ethics, to making sure that we are pursuing the mission of our agency, and that we are seen as advocates for the process. Generally, civilian oversight exists because of problems, because of concerns, because community members or perhaps community activists have pushed for it. It may be the elected officials identify that need. And so it often may be seen as something that is against law enforcement or against the police, but it's vital that oversight practitioners are seen as advocates for a fair and transparent process, because that is what we're here to do. We are not for or against anybody. We are for fairness and for transparency. If we can go to the next slide, please. We're almost done. So the things that we need to do to ensure that we do our work well and we have that legitimacy, like many professional fields, we have to continue to make sure that we are aware of developments in the field, that we are learning about changes in laws, about different policies and procedures in the agencies that we are engaged with, that we are conducting oversight of, and that we are staying on top of how those things are done, how the law enforcement agency is doing its work, what's happening in the community that is affecting how people see that, and that our primary obligation is to uphold the law and the goals and objectives that we're working on. It's not about self-interest. It's not about protecting your role or your position. It's really about making sure that those who live, work, play, learn in your community are treated fairly, and that all stakeholders have the benefit of that fair treatment. And with that, that's our quick presentation. The next slide just has our contact information for anyone who's viewing. We're always happy to be contacted. And I think with that, unless there's anything else from you, Cami, we can pause and see if there are any questions for us.
Before we go to questions, I just wanted to add that specific to Wilmington, I know that we talked about what we do broadly, but specific to Wilmington, what we would be doing is training on effective practices and topics relevant to civilian oversight of law enforcement, giving everyone a good base of information on which to build, assist in the development of relevant documents like policies and procedures, and also consultation with not only members of the CCRB, but also with members of the city throughout the implementation process to help guide you where necessary, facilitate when needed as you implement the CCRB. So with that, I also thank you and look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Oh, and I think we're deferring to the committee chair. I do see a couple of hands up, but we'll wait to see who'd like to ask us what. So.
I'm sorry, thank you. I was muted, wasn't I?
I
So you
believe
had
so,
no idea I
Madam
was
Chair.
speaking.
We did not.
Okay. Yes, I was fully paying attention, but I was muting because I've been coughing all day too. So I didn't want to interrupt your presentation. I just want to get a little bit better understanding of what you do and how you do it. I mean, you come to the city, you sign a contract with them, you offer services. I'm sure there's almost like a concierge of services. This is what we would like. This is how much money we would like to spend. So then you would put that together towards us and what we were requesting. I don't know if you get involved in how people are chosen for any of these committees or commissions. And if in fact you continue past that point, if you ever see a committee that is like blatantly pro-police or blatantly anti-police, or even if one individual on the committee is either way, does anyone ever intervene and say, this is not what we want? This is not the program that we put together? Because all through your presentation, you know, I heard professional, impartial, fair, and transparent process, and that's absolutely what we're looking for. So does anybody intervene if it starts going off the rails?
So normally, once the entity is established, we do training to help the CCRB members understand the process better, understand the ordinance better. We also have worked with city councils too prior to the appointment process to also help them kind of know, because it is, you've got this wonderful piece of legislation that and an entity you're trying to implement, and making sure that everybody knows all of the ins and outs of what's actually going to be expected of the individual members is essential when appointing them. We normally do not get involved because normally in the policies and procedures, there are processes for removing individuals. Sometimes you find that in the ordinance itself. And so normally once that happens, after we have given what the principles for effective civilian oversight are, the ethics behind it, then those are what the cities normally run with afterwards.
But I would assume you would suggest something like that when you were helping a city put together something, no?
Yes, as Brian mentioned before, part of our training is reinforcing the fact that civilian oversight is a fair and impartial process, and that although it can be difficult, I'm sure you all know that while it is difficult to make yourself neutral, civilian oversight is best done when it is neither pro-police or pro-community or civilian. It's done when it's pro-process, where people are working for the benefit of the process itself to make sure that it plays out in a fair, consistent manner.
Yeah, and if I may just add a bit, I would say,
Sure.
In terms of choosing members, it's something that, we have a lot of experience working with a range of communities on, and we've seen many different models. So that's something that we can certainly bring to any community, is how different communities have set those up. Some places are chosen by individual council members. Some places are chosen by some sort of advisory group. Some places are nominated from community organizations. There's a real range, and it really depends on the nature of the community that the board will serve in. And the other thing is, I know you began your question, Madam Chair, around basically the scope of work, and that's something that we have a lot of experience doing as well. Cami has been the point person on that for years, really figuring out, both looking at the needs of the community and the budget and our own resources, what the scope of work will be, how it will be established, general timelines that match with what the municipality or county is doing. So that's a big part of our contracting work. And then I did see, I'll just mention that Council Member Darby said she has to go at 6, and then Council Member Johnson also has a hand up. But
And it's 5:49.
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson has to go also, and he's part of the committee. So, sorry, Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Johnson,
The council member is muted
Councilmember Darby?
currently.
I can see them right now.
Yes.
For some reason, I can.
All
Councilmember
right.
Darby?
Yes, yes. No, thank you guys for coming and doing this presentation. I was really interested in the work that you were doing. I wasn't involved in initial conversations with you guys. And I'm really big on accountability for our police department. I have actually 3, maybe 4 questions, depending on how you answer. I know you guys have a contract with us, but I wanted to be sure that you wouldn't start doing work until we figure out what's happening on a state level in regards to civilian oversight.
Yes, so actually at this time, we just have sent in a scope of work. There's no contract in place. So one of the things that I will say that we have learned to be very good at is to make sure that we are working alongside a community. So we make sure that what we're doing is helpful. So if there needs to be some delay in the work to let what's happening on a state level play out, that is up to all of you.
Okay. May I follow up?
Yes, Councilmember.
Yes. My second question is about reading the scope of work, the contract that may or may not come into play. What is your role? It doesn't really outline your role in regards to working with elected officials. What does that look like in the contract? And yeah.
So most of the time, there's training that's involved so that we make sure that all of you have the information that you need as you move forward. And then we tend to make the scopes fairly broad so that we can make sure that we can meet your needs. And so if there are specific things other than training and being available for conversations with you, we can absolutely add that into the scope. But as of right now, we've left it kind of broad, but it also but I can tell you it would include training and then being available to all of you for questions.
Okay, thank you. And then with the so also in the scope of work, I was also looking for and was hoping that you guys would also strengthen the piece of legislation that we have now that establishes civilian review boards. What really frightens me about the state that our legislation is in now is that you have things like legislations that would pop up that would try to add like former or retired cops on, right? I heard that it's not going to be continued to go, but then the fact that it was even introduced to even jeopardize the purpose of this legislation is scary. And there are things in this legislation that needs to be tightened up to like strengthen it to really make it a citizens complaint review board. So I wanted to know, I think you're talking about training and establishing it. I think the very first step or foundation of this legislation, of this civilian review board is the piece of legislation that has been drafted. So, do you guys do legislation recommendations?
Brian, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So, that's a complicated question. And what I would say is that we certainly have worked with communities on drafting ordinances. We've been engaged with states on looking at state level legislation to some degree. It varies so much, but I will say that we've seen legislation and ordinances go into place that do have former law enforcement officers who are not part of the current agency. They may or may not have been, or they may be from another agency, and that can work. I know for many people that sounds like a non-starter because the idea is to have it community-based. And as we've talked about, in each community, in each environment, you have to find that the balance that works that you can actually make happen politically. So sometimes there are compromises that happen. And I think that our experience has been that even with some compromises, you can still make a very strong and very effective board that meets the needs of the entire community. So we work to try to really listen to all of the stakeholders and come up with something that will work, that will be able to provide that kind of guidance and support, and that will really be sustainable. The one thing that we have seen happen in a few places is where something was put in place and it creates so much backlash that actually undermined the effort, and it set things back for years. So again, we are not in control. We don't mandate what anyone can do, but we try to bring that experience and help people think through what are the unintended consequences of changes, whether they be seen as pro-police or anti-police or pro-community member or anti-community member.
And
Hope I answered that.
I'll just add that we also, in the training that we do, when we're talking about the principles of effective oversight and the effective practices that come out of that, we normally do that up front, and it often creates some thought processes within the community of the next iteration of legislation. And so giving you all of that information so that there is a grounding for how things could, if things are the way that you want them, are there improvements that can be made down the line? We like to give all of that information to you. I also just wanted to say, none of us are, well, we have attorneys on our board, but as this piece, we do not act as legal consultants in any way. So I just always like to say that, because sometimes people assume that we can also give that type of advice. And so I just wanted to put that out there as well.
No, thank you. That was good information. I have one last thing and then I'm done. Is that okay, Council President, Council Chairperson? Well, I don't hear her, so I'm gonna talk.
I'm sorry,
But-
council member, you have one more thing? I was
Yeah, I was just
waiting for you
making
to
sure
do
that
it.
was okay. No, I was making
Sure,
sure it was
go ahead.
okay. Usually you interrupt me, but the
No,
civilian, I
not
wanted.
yet.
Yep, not yet, but we still here. All right. So the composition. So I know the council person, the chair asked earlier about the composition of the Civilian Review Board. If you read the legislation, it says in section 2-50.80, the composition of the CRB has been established. There's going to be 9 members. 1 shall be a member of the mayor's office. 3 shall be members of the Wilmington City Council, and 3 members of the public nominated by the mayor upon the recommendation of the president of the city council. And then they list out organizations. So there's already outlines in the ordinance on what the composition is going to be. So if we have an issue with that, if we feel like it's pro-police or pro-community more, I think we have to look at the mayor nominates most of the people on the CRB. And another key thing, the member of the mayor's office is excluded from being an employee of the Wilmington Police Department. So that one position can be a Wilmington Police Department. Someone from the Wilmington Police Department can be the member of the mayor's office, and they are the primary driver in regards to the Civilian Review Board, in regards to administrating it and managing the Civilian Review Board. Whoever is nominated by the mayor from the mayor's office can be a Wilmington police officer. I want the community to know, and that they are the primary person who manages the Civilian Review Board. Thank you. That was my last comment. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you, council member. If I may ask you all to, I'm sure you're well aware of what's going on in our state with the Civilian Review Board, with the Police Bill of Rights.
Yes.
Okay, so you know, with what we presently have here, and this is where my objection comes in right now, has nothing to do with the Civilian Review Board, has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with us passing anything that gives false hope to the community, because something that, you know, a whole community might have looked forward to the last 20 years at this coming on board. So council passes legislation saying this is what we're going to do, and this is the makeup we're going to have of the committee, and blah, 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 blah. Well, the average human being thinks, this is great, I've been waiting for this for 20 years. Here we go. When in full fact, we can do it, and they can do all the hard work they want, and we can dump as much money as we want inside of it, money that we don't have right now, but money that we want inside of it, and it's still not going to matter because there's still nothing that can be done to anybody as far as this board is concerned until the police bill of rights is changed. So that's my only objection to everything that's going on with all the parties. That somewhere there has to become a meeting of the minds that, you know, this is the law we're going to have for the state. Or cut off Wilmington and say, Wilmington doesn't have to be part of this, of what the law is in Dover I'm talking about. That can happen easily too, but it won't. So I don't know if you all had looked into anything of that.
Maybe I can start briefly, just to say that, as you said, certainly aware of what's going on in the state legislature, have been watching a bit what's going on in the state Senate around the changes in the current law. And again, recognize there are real challenges. So I think what I would say is, as I mentioned, you don't want to sort of set people up for failure. And we have seen that happen before.
Exactly.
And I think that one of the things that we've seen that has worked effectively is continuing to do that groundwork, recognizing that nothing is absolutely set. The exact composition, the exact powers and duties of the board may not be set, but doing that work early on to build community support, find out what the needs are in the community, and figure out what you can do, and then build on that. Again, Bennington, Vermont, where I've been working just most recently, since they're very close to Massachusetts, they've had some real challenges along the way, in that they're community activists that want a very strong model, and there are limitations in their state law that are about the structure of local government. They operate under Dillon's rule, not home rule like Massachusetts does. And so they have had to make sure that all through the process, they're telling people, this is what we want to do, and what the exact powers and composition and ability of the board to do work will be determined down the road as things may change in the law. So I think that it's something we're familiar with. It is a challenge, but I think just being upfront with people as you do that work is important. But my advice would be not to let that stop the work. But Cammie, I don't know if you have something.
Yeah, I would say, in every community, well, not every community, there are some communities out there that are faced with issues where there are state statutes in place, and sometimes issues with municipal charters where they are not able to do everything that they wanted to do from the beginning. And however, there are components of civilian oversight that exist regardless, that puts them in an amazing position to be a conduit between community and law enforcement in a way that many other entities in cities can't be. And so being able to do work in that way means that no matter what might be impeding some authorities, you still have this amazing ability to move forward and help build community relations, so that there is a benefit regardless.
And I can see that. I really and truly can see that. But I said that was my only objection. That's not true. I think the present makeup of the one that we have is just so wrong. I don't think anybody elected should be on a committee like this, because it's part of our life all the time. And even the mayor's office, I don't think they should be represented. If it's supposed to be a civilian police board, it should be civilians, not elected officials and people that work for the system and that sort of thing. Like, have a fairness out there really exists, that just not a pretend field. Somebody has their hand up, and I believe it might be Tanya Washington. Is that true?
Yes, Chairman Walsh. I just wanted to dispel any negative innuendo, as Council Member Darby alluded to, the fact that the mayor would appoint someone that's a former police officer to manage the Civilian Review Board. That's absolutely not true. I don't know where that came from, but I just wanted to dispel that, because we don't want to start off with some preconceived notion as to what this board looks like.
I knew that, so I just didn't,
Yeah,
yeah, that's fine.
okay.
He probably appointed someone I didn't like. It's a joke. Any other person have any comments or questions they would like to ask of council? I mean, council members who would like to ask at this point. Is there any member of the public who would like to ask anything? Or make a statement?
Madam Chair, we do have a couple of members of the public.
Whose hands are up? I'm not sure which one was there first, the FOP Lodge or Shanae Miller. Or I'm sorry, Cheyenne Miller.
FOP Lodge had their hand up.
Okay. Whomever is speaking for FOP Lodge. Hello? All right, Cheyenne Miller.
Madam Chair, I think FOP Lodge has unmuted their mic.
Okay. FOP Lodge,
Hello, ma'am. Michael Groark, FOP President, Lodge 1.
how do you do?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I think it would be wise for the city council to pump the brakes on all the community review board talk and stop giving people a sense of false hope like you stated, ma'am. Of course, we all know none of this means anything until SB 141 passes and the governor signs it. And the chances of that happening in its present form are slim to none. I know there is a substitute bill that might be pushed before the end of the session. And that version, if community review boards happen in that version, they're pretty much going to be a useless entity. They won't have subpoena power, and they'll only recommend, if that, any discipline. So it would be nice if in a regular council meeting or a public safety committee meeting, this could all be put aside until we know that it actually happens. And however much money was spent on these consultants to come in today, it'd be nice if the taxpayers could get their money back, because it's a waste. And that's all I got for now. Thank you.
Okay. I have to tell you, quite frankly, well, never mind. We don't answer questions on this. Cheyenne?
Hi, my name is Cheyenne Miller. I'm a resident over in 7th District in the city of Wilmington. And I just read an article in WDEL about a Wilmington Police Department officer who sent lewd pictures to a 17-year-old minor. And besides all the other calls and conversations and things I've witnessed and people I know that have had Wilmington Police do something that has been conduct unbecoming of an officer, however we want to frame it, I'm really concerned, because what we're saying right now is that we don't want to do anything to hold these officers accountable. I do hope SB 149 passes, and I hope that the city council can support that. The last one that came out there, I'm not even sure if the chair of this committee supported that resolution that the city council put out. I don't think he did. And so things like that are where I'm concerned about, is like, do we really want to shift so that we have more accountability over police officers who are doing these terrible things? I'm finding it very difficult to see on city council, from our leadership in the mayor's office and from our Delaware General Assembly, that people want to see accountability. And we just heard it from a cop himself, that SB 149, if the substitute comes out, isn't going to look the way it's supposed to look, isn't going to do what we want it to do. And so I'm calling on the city to do the best that they can to create a actual form of accountability for police officers who aren't doing the right thing. And I don't think waiting for the state to do everything is the right thing. I think the city needs to set an example for the rest of the state and go forward and ensure that this is a strong and independent board without officers on it, which I guess that's a fight that's not worth fighting anymore. I also want to say that I think it's important that we have means of investigating police and doing this annually, right? We need to have annual reviews of police discipline, and what's happening with violence with police officers in our community. And those should be annual things that the Community Review Board does. We should be funding it through the police department. And we should be ensuring that the budget for the police officer reflects that accountability. And so those are the things that I want to say. I just think it's very important for us to know that while we're sitting here arguing about whether a CRB should look like this or that, then it seems to me as if the CRB needs to happen because y'all literally got officers out here raping little kids. That's not cool, right? And nobody seems to want to talk about that. So hope that helps you guys move forward with the right decision.
Thank you for your input. Is anyone else from the public interested in giving their opinion? Seeing none. Any council members? Last call for you. Thank you. Well, I really do appreciate the time you took out of your lives to come down here to speak to us today. I think the program's interesting. I think we should all look at it very carefully. And I'm sure we'll have many more questions that we might want to ask you that will contact you. Are there any questions you might want to ask any of us?
Not at this time, but thank you so much for having us today. It's a pleasure speaking before you, and we look forward to, and we'll be here if there are any additional questions that come up.
And I just echo exactly the same thing. It's been a privilege to be able to speak with you today and look forward to any future questions and work together.
Thanks so much. Thanks for putting up with me and with my sound. On my very expensive machine that never works. So thank you. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Spadola, are you going to second that?
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Good night, everyone. Be careful.
Good night.